Hello and welcome to the Perspectives of Parents survey launch for 2024. This survey is hosted by myself, Laura Trendall, and Jane McKenna, who is with me today. Welcome, Jane.
Hi, Laura. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to co-host this with you.
Thank you. So just to give you a little bit of background on the Perspectives of Parents survey for 2024. Why are we doing this now is a really pertinent question. So just to give you a little bit of background. So I have a background of working with and promoting diversity in the technology industry through my work previously as the co-chair of the BT Women's Network. In the last 20 to 25 years, we've seen great improvements made in terms of legislation, in terms of corporate policies to support parental leave, whether that is adoption leave, the changes we saw in terms of shared parental leave being extended following the European model. However, the experiences that we hear from colleagues who are still working in the corporate space is whilst we have amazing policies, sometimes what we find the practice in corporates does not reflect the thought that's gone into the policies developed by the diversity, equality and inclusion teams and by the networks that support gender networks and working parents. We're curious to know more about this. So Jane and I have developed some survey questions based on the feedback from lived experiences of our clients and corporates that we engage with. So Jane, I'll just hand over to you to give a brief introduction of your background and tell people more about what you do through your work with Brilliant Me Coaching.
Thanks, Laura. Yes. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Jane McKenna, and I set up Brilliant Me Coaching about 3 or so years ago. Prior to that, I was in retail, fashion retail, international retail for 20 plus years. Had a great time there, and I really, really enjoyed working, particularly with lots of women, also working parents. And I really loved working with people. And that's what sort of led me to making my career pivot into supporting parents, women, and everyone really in the sort of career development space. I'm particularly passionate about supporting parents in the workplace and helping them thrive, because from my own experience, I found it really difficult to juggle being a parent and working in the corporate space. So it's something that I'm super passionate about now. So it's a delight to be here and doing this project with Laura.
Wonderful. And it's really important that we open the dialogue, honestly, about what parents actually need. One of the things that I often see is very well-intentioned measures, surveys, and it may work for some parents and work for a certain demographic, but perhaps the interventions don't include everybody that needs support, or perhaps managers need better training and support to recognise those that are going through the big life changes that becoming a first-time parent or even second, third, fourth-time parent can mean, because the demands at different ages and stages as we go through our corporate life cycle, it's different what we need when we're dealing with newborn versus somebody who perhaps is taking on fostering responsibilities for a teenager. They're quite different needs and considerations. So hopefully what we'll create through this survey is those conversations in companies. And by all means, anybody who is with us or watching the replay, do feel free to reach out to Jane or myself if you do require a confidential conversation. So the challenges and context that we're picking up, as we say, from new parent experiences that are being reported, both to ourselves and to colleagues, are things like the loss of confidence, either before going on parental leave or actually after on return, particularly if there's been changes in the organisation, changes in the marketplace, changes in job responsibility. The other issues can be knowing what is a reasonable boundary to set in terms of flexibility, in terms of work-life balance, in terms of when are we expected to read and respond to emails, how many days should we be working in the office, and with particular regard to the new rights for flexible working that have been extended in the workplace. These are things we really strongly need to think about, and particularly if you're a parent returning to work, it's about, you know, do you feel that you're able to enforce those boundaries without that having an impact on career prospects? And again, you know, do we need to open some minds in terms of, particularly at the middle management and supervisory level, you know, the fact that somebody doesn't need to be necessarily present in the office to be an effective member of staff. So again, these are judgments and conversations that need to be had. It's knowing where to go, and I say this from experience. I'm a mother of three. In terms of on the return to work, how do we achieve balance? And particularly if you're a highly driven and career focused individual, how do you make sure that you are perhaps not overworking to compensate, making sure that there is a focus on mental health, on nutrition, whilst also achieving at work? And sometimes it can support us to have managers who are better educated, perhaps, in spotting the signs that somebody is having a difficulty achieving balance, and being willing, being courageous to have that conversation with the employee to help them achieve a more effective balance by looking at the demands and the job design. Obviously, any change in family dynamics, and that can also extend to things like caring responsibilities, bereavement, can change our focus. And obviously, the focus on work, some parents actually, what we see is return to work perhaps more ambitious because of the new responsibilities that they have. And that can sometimes be frustrated by, should we say, maybe it's cultural beliefs. I know that this is something I certainly had in my corporate career. I was very much geared for international travel. And working overseas with clients, it was something I enjoyed a great deal. And it was almost an unspoken assumption that I wouldn't be available for international travel after having my children. I think this is something that many people returning from parental leave confront, is that actually, rather than making assumption about what somebody's preferences and limitations are, perhaps ask them. I did go on actually after my corporate career to work successfully internationally and overseas. And, you know, it's just a different balance of childcare. And again, sometimes there's skills and organisational skills that we can pass to parents and workshops we can give to help them achieve that if their focus is on driving the career forward. So sometimes it's new learned skills of time management. And
all right, I just want to mention also quite an interesting statistic from the Working Parents Survey that Jane Johnson at Career into Motherhood did. Around 2/3 of working mums said their level of ambition had either increased or stayed the same since having children. So again, it's sort of busting that myth, isn't it? That
it is. It's absolutely bringing statistics like that into awareness, because it runs absolutely counter to the lived experience of most returners to work. Whereas I say it's an unspoken and implied assumption that actually people will want to spend more time at home. I'm going to say from personal experience, I absolutely relished my time overseas because it meant that I could have a complete focus, do something different, and, you know, knowing that my children are being cared for by somebody responsible when I've had to put in place childcare arrangements to allow that to happen as a single parent. So absolutely. The final point that was raised is managing guilt. And this is a really interesting one, because one of the things I often say to my coaching clients is actually whatever you're doing, you do it fully. So if you're being present at work, be present at work. If you're with your family, be present with your family. Don't be trying to answer emails or juggle your conference calls. because really guilt is an emotion that does not serve us to be at our best, either as a parent or as a colleague. So it's really interesting that for many people, managing guilt comes up. And I think we've really got to question this and again, begin to change the narrative about the assumptions of what a good parent looks like. So Jane, I'll hand over to you from the manager's view. Could you just talk about some of the challenges that you're hearing from the organisations that you're working with?
Yeah, so I think these are sort of the four things that we, in our conversation and the conversations that we've had with organisations that came out. So, some of those challenges are how as a manager, being equipped to know how to deal with sort of balancing those team needs and workload with someone going on maternity, parental, or adoption leave. It's like deciding early how you're actually going to manage that leave period. Are you going to backfill, replace, or devolve those responsibilities out onto the team? I think one of the biggest challenges and a gap that we've already identified, and something that's really driven us to want to carry out this survey, is making sure that managers have the tools to be clear and have a clear understanding on sort of legal and policy responsibilities, so that they can support their parents in the workplace, their returners, or those people just about to go on leave, with all of the appropriate tools that they need. And again, having those tools and the correct language in order to communicate with those parents on their teams, that empathy, that understanding, and managing someone, each employee, as a whole person. That's how I sort of always think about it. And then that final point is around managing performance and supporting colleagues. We talked about not making assumptions about that person, that employee, not being as committed to work, and it's about challenging all of these as to giving managers the support that they need to be able to support their team more fully in a full 360 way.
Yeah, absolutely. Because in terms of managing performance, and it may be the case that there are changes in terms of performance, concentration, workload, but often any of these things can be rectified and navigated if we put the right coaching, the right training, the right support mechanisms in place for the employee. I find this often comes down to the willingness of the organisation and also of the manager or supervisor. And that may also, we have to recognise, be coloured by their own experience or past experiences with employees in this situation. So what we find in the conversations that we've had is that the parent-friendly policies are often there, often a great effort has been made for that, but on its own, it's not necessarily effective. So Jane, would you just like to talk us through what you've found to be effective from the feedback that we've received?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. Sometimes we can be at the danger of sort of putting these policies in place and think, oh, great, job done. But it's actually about what happens in practice that makes the real difference. So these are the things that, from various conversations I've had, panel discussions that we've attended, that we've sort of identified as the things that can really, really elevate supporting parents in the workplace to the next level. So the thing that we're just massive advocates of, me and Laura, is actually how those policies and procedures are delivered by managers. And again, are your managers equipped to do that in the best way possible? Also, it's about all working parents being considered. So not just thinking about the maternity leave piece, but it's also offering enhanced paternity and parental leave policies wherever possible, and adoption leave as well. Another thing is around fostering a culture where every employee feels they can ask for flexible working. We know that there has been, the very, very recent changes in policy, which are absolutely an incredible move forward. But it's also about that culture of feeling that someone can ask for flexible working without any bias, and that will be taken seriously. And we're not talking just about mothers in the workplace, but all parents, all employees. Really important is about having those policies that we will have painstakingly sort of put in place to support parents, make them publicly accessible. So by that, that's not just easily accessible to employees already in situ, but also so that prospective employees can find them, becoming more and more a bigger and bigger decision-making driving force with future employees to find out what these sort of policies or what policies are in place with organisations that they want to work for.
Absolutely. And I think the thing about making them publicly accessible says a lot about an organisation's approach to both culture and transparency. For me, if I was going into my career now, this would be a key deciding factor on me assessing the culture of the organisation and actually, is this a place where I'm going to be happy and where I'm going to thrive? So particularly for those looking at employee recruitment and retention, this is one very easy fix that can be made very, very quickly. And also it makes you accountable for the content of what your policy is. If it's not going to stand up to what your competitors for that talent are offering, perhaps that's something that needs a rethink.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. And it's like you say, it's a really good marker of the culture on the inside of that organisation when viewing it from the outside. And another thing around culture that's really important is that role modelling from the top down. So if you've got buy-in on these policies and procedures from board level, it really helps to sort of foster that culture. And as I mentioned on the previous slides, again, managing an employee as a whole person. So really sort of taking into account who they are and help them show up to work as themselves. And finally, one of the this has come up time and time again in conversation about how we sort of evolve, like the way we work. Everything's changed, hasn't it, in the last sort of four years for in the corporate world. But an evolution of that is if we can switch roles to being outcome based rather than around fixed working patterns, we suddenly make everything much more accessible on every level.
Absolutely. I mean, I was very fortunate that I was in an organisation where we were pioneering flexible working and management by objectives. And I will say, there is research that I undertook that actually shows somebody coming back and maybe is on a part-time hours contract because they want to have that flexibility. Actually, their outputs are near identical to that of a full-time employee. So it's a really worthwhile approach and consideration that we do start looking at outcomes and impact rather than hours, rather than things like keystroke technology. And needing to track where an employee is at every moment. I think we actually need to look at what is the impact that somebody is having, what is their contribution to the net bottom line. It's really, really important for me. It's going to an empowered style of management, actually, and I think this was where, in some ways, the changes in recent years, it broke something that had been long held. The issue with giving people flexibility was lack of trust. When people can't go into the office, you have to trust them. So I think it requires an absolute shift in management thinking and culture to make sure that we do trust and empower employees and trust them to do the roles that they're hired for, regardless of the family situation. Okay. So some of the other things that can help that have been discussed and have come up and been observed in organisations we've worked with include things like parent networks to create systems of support and, again, to raise the discussions that are relevant internally within organisations, buddy systems, and also sometimes looking at things like job sharing on return to work, mentoring programs, workshops, lunch and learn sessions, specific coaching. And even, I think, Jane, you were mentioning an organisation which was even promoting sleep coaching to help parents with their resilience and their well-being, and general well-being support. You know, I think, you know, certainly from my studies with positive psychology and happiness, happy and well staff are actually better at returning to the bottom line. And also, you know, that it's less of a risk, it's less of a cost to your business if you're able to keep people in situ. You're not losing the years of knowledge that you've trained them in. You keep the harmony within the team. So the cost of not retaining the staff, of having to replace somebody, perhaps paying recruiters, maybe it's those 3 months while you wait for a new employee to hit the ground running, that clearly outweighs the costs of some of the interventions that you can put in place to support staff. So Jane, I'd just like you to run through some of the key statistics that you gave to support the launch of this survey.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, so I did quite a lot of research of some reports that had been, and some surveys of research that had been done over the last couple of years. So I wanted to really sort of highlight some of these key stats. So yes, 86% of women will be mothers by the time they're 40, from Jessica Heegren's Careers After Babies report she did last year. That's a huge statistic. And if we just think about that in terms of how the investment that we make in our women and parents, you know, that we're the difference that it will make to support more women and parents in the workforce going forward is going to be huge. This one from the CIPHR report. So 49% of working parents feel the challenges of balancing work and family life has hindered their career prospects. And again, this is all about the support within the workplace and that push and pull, isn't it, between sort of work and home.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I will say, sort of one of my observations, is if you feel your career prospects are being hindered, probably your motivation in terms of your contribution and effectiveness in your role might not be as good as it may be. You may be keeping an eye out for job search. I'm also going to say, in terms of economic participation and contribution, this can be a big issue. I mean, one of the biggest things at the moment, we're in a recession, but economic participation of those who are working age parents is hugely critical to the resilience of the economy. So people feeling that they have prospects that they want to advance and increase in their career, it benefits them, but it also benefits the unlocking of the roles for the pipeline sitting behind as well. So we really do have an interest in keeping people in work, developing the roles. And I know that there's a whole of the debate on AI and what that's going to do. Genuinely, I've been through a few technological evolutions, and I'm going to say the roles are still there, but people need to be empowered to thrive in them and to make the right decisions. For me, I do so much work with leadership and decision making, and that has to come in organisations from a place of confidence. So what we can't have is, at any given time, perhaps 10 to 15% of our workforce feeling disempowered. Okay.
Yeah, and that sort of plays into this really quite shocking statistic, I think. Like 75% of working parents suffer stress and anxiety as a result of managing their work-life balance. So yeah, that just plays into that exactly what you were just saying, Laura, doesn't it? And about that, we've got to sort of start taking this seriously in terms of having support in place and having that equipping our managers within our organisations to support parents in the workplace.
Absolutely. And I think it's about taking a holistic approach. I mean, this is a very sweeping statistic, and the curiosity for me, which I think will draw out through the survey, is what is it about the stress and anxiety? What are the challenges in managing the work-life balance? Because sometimes It can be expectation on work-life balance, the hours worked, the patterns of leave, or the fact that you've returned to a role where actually there's been a restructure and perhaps job redesign, and this is being done as a, a different way of perhaps managing somebody out of business. So I think we've really got to dig a little bit deeper in terms of what sits behind this 75% statistic. Is it the fact of becoming a parent and not getting enough sleep, or is it actually some of the management and supervisory and cultural behaviours that are going on in the organisation?
And then another sort of big number here from the Careers After Babies report again is 85% of women leave full-time employment within 3 years of having kids. And if you go on to the next slide.
Well, I'd just like to touch on this one, because I will say that's also a pattern I recognise, and it correlates with figures from the number of businesses being registered, the number of women who midlife upon becoming parents leave organisations and set up their own businesses rather than have to deal with the politics of negotiating for work-life balance, or perhaps for other reasons. Sometimes it is because there is a real creative inspiration and something they want to create through a business, but sometimes it is also about being outside of those structures and able to be present as a parent, as well as contributing to the workforce in a way that's meaningful to them.
Yeah, I think those stats are always fascinating when you start to think about then where are those 85% of women going? And then, and this final stat is about the 19% drop out of work entirely. And I think that that amounts to, I can't remember what the figure is, but it's something like 20-odd thousand women dropping out each year from the workforce. So again, something, yes, maybe naturally some of this dropout would be people making that decision of their own volition, but there's definitely very, digging into a little bit more about what is that pinch point that's making women and parents really struggle with that balance of work. And that's one of the key drivers, isn't it, for us wanting to carry out these surveys, Laura?
Absolutely, because again, that dropping out of work entirely, when we say that, we mean entirely. They're not volunteering, they're not looking at setting up a business. This is a choice, perhaps to, for a period of time, become economically inactive because either the cost of childcare, which is a really big factor, or other reasons that maybe mean economically or structurally, it's simply not possible to continue. And sometimes that is a choice, sometimes it's not a choice and it's a position people are forced to. So again, a little bit more digging through our survey into what is sitting behind that. And I'll be interested as well to see the differences between corporate organisations and between SMEs, because in my experience also with mentoring and supporting the entrepreneurship community, what I have found is sometimes there is a real lack of understanding of employment law within SMEs and a perception of parents and caring responsibilities as a cost on an SME business. Now, it truly is, and perhaps they don't have the turnover to support it, but then the question needs to be raised is what changes need to be made to government policy in order to support that. If we can do it when we're in a crisis situation, as we were with the pandemic, surely when we're not in a crisis situation, we should also be looking at those levels of structural support for businesses. So just to wrap it up, in terms of the survey, how you can help to support this initiative is to complete the survey yourself in terms of your own experiences. It's to share it on social media with colleagues, with friends, whether that's through LinkedIn and the more business-focused social media, through Instagram, through Facebook. So we will be publishing resources to enable that to happen. One thing where we've reached out directly to those of you in our network, please do email your employees, your gender networks, your inclusion team about this initiative and see where it can be promoted in things like internal newsletters, intranet, to the employee cohort. Do encourage colleagues to participate and also be brave enough to have conversations and share the statistics we've shared today. Share those facts and we'll keep posting those, and we hope that you will too. So our intention is the survey will be kept open until late summer. We will be sharing the links to the survey following up when we publish this replay. So hopefully once you receive those in your inbox, you'll be happy to take some actions, and we will prepare some draft text as well to help you with that sharing. So finally, just thank you for attending, and thank you to Jane for your contribution and for initiating this survey to help us collaborate and hopefully come with some great statistics which can help drive the movement forward.
Thank you, Laura. It's been a pleasure, and I'm excited about the start of these important conversations that we're going to have as a result of this. Thank you.
Thank you.